Gentlelady from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding me the customary 30 minutes and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, just a few weeks ago, it appeared as though the crises that had come to define this Congress maybe were coming to an end. In a rare show of bipartisanship, Democrats in the Senate and Republicans in the House passed a budget compromise that set the spending levels for the next 2 years. As was clear at the time of its passage, the bipartisan budget agreement authorized spending well beyond the current debt limit. Despite that fact, 166 members of the majority voted to authorize the spending and to increase the nation's debt. At that time, a member of the majority declared that passing the legislation would be the responsible thing to do, and indeed it was. Now, today, we're going to find out whether that moment of responsibility was an aberration or a sign of things to come. The majority has their simple choice today. We understand they don't have the votes to pass this, and the Democrats, as they have been on so many other things we have tried to get to the floor, are more than willing to do our part for our country, because that, Mr. Speaker, is why we were elected to come here. The majority has a choice today: act responsibly and pay the country's bills, which they voted for, some of them, or trigger another economic panic by threatening default. For decades, up to about 2011, which was just held up as a landmark here, no matter which party was in charge, Congress always raised the debt ceiling without hesitation or pause. In the years that I've been here, there was never any notion of having to pay a ransom to get the side that you were not on to do what its duty called for. But in recent years, the majority doubts the seriousness of this responsibility and dared the global financial system to punish them for their malfeasance. Although we need no reminder, in 2011, the majority of this chamber demanded ransom in exchange for an increase in the debt ceiling. The self-inflicted wound that followed sparked the most volatile week for the financial markets since 2008, when we had the financial crisis, and resulted in the credit rating agency Standard & Poor's downgrading our nation's credit rating for the first time in history. And for what? Some notion that they didn't have to meet their responsibility. In the years since, the majority has continued to play this dangerous game of political hostage-taking that hurts our economy and even caused a 16-day government shutdown. And that shutdown, Mr. Speaker, let me remind the people of America, took $24 billion out of our economy for absolutely nothing. Even when it has been clear that there's only one way out of a self-inflicted crisis such as the government shutdown, the majority pursued an approach that can be summarized as: only when we have tied ourselves in legislative knots, only when we have thrown the economy into turmoil, only after we have frightened employers from hiring and given global investors pause, we will do the right thing, as we are doing today. This irresponsible approach has predictably drawn the ire of the American people and dragged the approval ratings of the House of Representatives to historic lows. Now, today, I urge the majority to follow the lead of the Democrat leadership, my colleagues, and me, and do the right thing first, and try from hence on to do the right thing first instead of last. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on today's rule, and that by itself is wonderful for me to do, feels good, and the underlying legislation, so that we can honor the commitments this Congress has made and protect the full faith and credit of the United States. We are charged to do no less. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time is reserved. Gentleman from Georgia.
Pardon me, Mr. Speaker. I would ask my friend from New York if she has any speakers remaining.
Mr. Speaker, I have no request for time.
I'm prepared to close.
All right, let me do that.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
If he has no further speakers, then
I do not.
I'm prepared to close. Mr. Speakers, I've said the question before us today is a simple one. Are we going to pay the country's bills, or will the United States become a deadbeat nation? It's not a question of increasing the nation's spending. The question was answered when the 166 members of the majority voted to spend beyond the nation's debt ceiling by passing the bipartisan budget agreement just a few weeks ago. Today, as real Americans do, and we should follow, they pay their debts. And so when this is coming due, we hope after today we will be able to pay ours. For our part, my Democrat colleagues and I are ready to do the right thing, and have been for some time, by increasing our nation's debt ceiling and protecting the full faith and credit of the United States of America. And I urge my colleagues to vote yes on today's rule and the underlying legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.